Welcome to a new deep dive. Today we're plunging into, well, one of the most critical topics of our time, I think we can agree. It's a subject that impacts every corner of our planet, every aspect of our lives. The reality of climate change. It's a phrase we hear constantly, right? But what does it genuinely mean when we talk about these fundamental global shifts? And what are its far-reaching, sometimes very personal consequences? Because this isn't just about, abstract scientific models or predictions for way off in the future. It's about shifting landscapes, human stories that are unfolding right now in real time. Think of Pacific Islands facing an existential threat, huge forests burning in California, agricultural lands turning salty in Bangladesh. But it's also, importantly, about powerful global movements, incredible scientific ingenuity, and big economic reconfigurations that are already underway. Things that challenge our assumptions, but also maybe open up new possibilities.
Precisely. Our mission today is really to move beyond the headlines, to uncover the foundational aspects of this global challenge. We're here to unpack the core mechanics of climate change, explore its profound and often quite surprising impacts on communities and economies worldwide, and also to illuminate the innovative solutions and the urgent actions being taken, and those still crucially needed. We'll delve into the really robust scientific consensus, present some compelling real-world accounts that I think bring the data to life, and examine both the immense challenges and, crucially, the significant opportunities ahead.
Right. So if you're looking to truly grasp this multifaceted phenomenon, understand its intricate connections, and discover why it matters directly to you, then let's unpack this together.
Yeah.
Okay, to begin, let's lay the groundwork. What exactly are we talking about when we say climate change? It's a term that gets used so frequently, maybe sometimes without everyone having the same fundamental meaning in mind.
Yeah, that's a great starting point. At its essence, climate change represents a long-term, significant alteration in Earth's typical weather patterns. This isn't just about, a few hot summers or a particularly cold winter. It signifies a fundamental, sustained shift in the planet's climate system over decades, even centuries. And critically, what sets the current changes apart is their primary driver, human activities. Particularly since, the dawn of the Industrial Revolution back in the mid-18th century. It's vital to understand that while Earth has experienced natural climate fluctuations throughout its history, ice ages, warmer periods, the current rate and magnitude of warming are, frankly, unprecedented. It points to a profound human-accelerated transformation of our planetary systems. This isn't just a cycle, it's a new trajectory we're on.
And how do our human activities influence this? What are these greenhouse gases we consistently hear about? Can you break that down a bit?
Sure. Our extensive reliance on fossil fuels, like coal, oil, and natural gas for energy transport industry, along with widespread deforestation and various industrial processes, releases a significant amount of certain gases into the atmosphere. The key ones are carbon dioxide, that's CO, methane or CH, and nitrous oxide, N. These substances behave, much like the glass in a greenhouse, or maybe a more relatable analogy, like an overly thick blanket wrapped around the Earth.
Ah, okay, like trapping heat.
Exactly. What they do is trap heat that would otherwise radiate back out into space, so the planet warms progressively. This extra thick blanket effect is what fundamentally drives the warming we're observing. And what's interesting is these gases have different characteristics. Methane, for instance, is much more potent than co at trapping heat over a shorter time scale, maybe a couple of decades, whereas co persists in the atmosphere for centuries, so its warming effect accumulates over a very long time.
Okay, that makes sense. And what does this translate to in terms of global temperatures? Is the change really that significant? Because, 1.1 degrees Celsius or 2 degrees Fahrenheit, it doesn't intuitively sound like a huge amount to the average person.
That's a powerful and essential question. It's precisely where the true magnitude of the problem often gets underestimated. So since around 1750, the global average temperature has climbed by approximately 1.1 degrees C, about 2 degrees Fahrenheit. And while that number might seem small in isolation, its implications are genuinely enormous for a complex, interconnected global system like Earth's climate. Leading scientific bodies like the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, they synthesize all the global climate research. And their reports indicate that this seemingly modest increase is already leading to severe and observable consequences.
Like what specifically?
Well, we're seeing accelerated melting of ice caps and glaciers, which contributes directly to rising sea levels. We're seeing more intense and unpredictable storms, prolonged periods of drought affecting vast regions, and fundamental shifts in ecosystems impacting biodiversity and natural balances. You could think of it like a slight fever in a complex biological system like the human body. Even a small deviation can trigger cascading failures across interconnected organs.
Right, leading to nonlinear responses, feedback loops, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Things like melting permafrost in the Arctic, releasing even more trapped methane, which then causes more warming, a dangerous feedback loop. And, moreover, projections from these comprehensive international assessments warn that without drastic reductions in emissions, we could face global warming of maybe 2.5 to 4 degrees Celsius by the end of the century.
4 degrees, that sounds
Correct.
catastrophic.
Such a scenario could render vast areas of the planet literally uninhabitable for human life. It would profoundly alter landscapes, force mass migrations, and fundamentally disrupt societies as we know them. The consequences of even small increments in global average temperature are far-reaching and deeply interconnected.
So if this warming is due to this extra thick blanket of greenhouse gases, what human activities are the biggest contributors? Where is this blanket predominantly coming from?
Okay, yeah, let's break that down. There are several primary culprits, and it's important to understand their relative contributions. The largest piece of the puzzle, accounting for roughly 65% of global emissions, comes from our reliance on fossil fuels.
Okay, 65%. That's huge.
It is. This primarily involves energy production, think power plants burning coal or natural gas for electricity. And also transportation, like cars, trucks, airplanes, ships, and heating for homes and industries.
Yeah.
This sector is by far the biggest driver.
Right. Fossil fuels first. What's next?
Another significant contributor is deforestation. The clearing of forests, particularly in vital areas like the Amazon rainforest. When trees are cut down or burned, they release vast quantities of stored carbon back into the atmosphere. Plus, forests act as crucial carbon sinks. They absorb euros naturally as they grow, so their destruction is a double hit.
Like you mentioned earlier, releasing carbon and reducing the planet's ability to soak it up.
Precisely. And disturbingly, recent data from just a couple of years back showed Amazon deforestation reached a 15-year high. So it's an ongoing, urgent issue.
Okay, so fossil fuels, deforestation, what else?
Agriculture also plays a substantial role, contributing roughly 30% of total emissions.
30% from farming? How?
It comes primarily from two sources.
Okay.
Firstly, livestock farming, especially cattle, which produces significant amounts of methane, that potent greenhouse gas from their digestive processes. And secondly, the widespread use of nitrogen-based fertilizers in crop production. These release nitrous oxide, which is another powerful and long-lived greenhouse gas.
I hadn't realized agriculture was quite that high.
It's significant. And finally, various industrial processes, things like cement manufacturing, chemical production, they also release considerable amounts of co-euro and other potent gases. So when you add all these activities up, humanity has added an astonishing amount, estimated at 1.2 trillion tons of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere since the mid-19th century.
Wow, 1.2 trillion tons.
Yeah, this massive accumulation is what's truly driving the accelerated warming we're experiencing across the globe. It's fundamentally altering the planet's energy balance.
Those numbers are stark, truly stark. But here's where it gets particularly impactful, I think. Climate change isn't just about charts and atmospheric compositions, it's profoundly personal. It's about communities, livelihoods, futures being fundamentally altered. Let's delve into some of those real-life accounts, stories from the front lines that give a voice to the statistics.
Absolutely. We can start with Kiribati. It's a nation comprising 33 low-lying atolls scattered across the vast Pacific Ocean. For the people there, rising sea levels aren't some distant threat. It's an immediate existential crisis unfolding right now. Just for context, global sea levels have been rising by about 3.7 millimeters each year since the 1990s.
Which doesn't sound like much per year, but it adds up.
It adds up significantly, especially when you consider it's a direct consequence of melting ice from glaciers and ice sheets, and also the simple fact that warmer water expands thermal expansion. Now, in Kiribati, most of the land barely rises 2 meters, that's maybe 6 or 7 feet above sea level. So this rate of rise is catastrophic. The nation's former president, Anote Tung, has spoken very powerfully about personally witnessing villages disappearing beneath the waves. Entire communities are being compelled to abandon their ancestral homes. The government has even purchased land in Fiji as a potential relocation site.
Wow, buying land in another country.
Yes, acknowledging the inevitable, really. But leaving behind generations of culture, history, community bonds, it's an undeniably heartbreaking prospect. Recent reports highlighted a particularly high tide in the capital, Tarawa, that displaced 2,000 people just temporarily from their homes. Kiribati really stands as a poignant illustration that climate change is, at its core, a human rights crisis. It impacts the very existence and cultural identity of a people, forcing this impossible choice between their homeland and survival.
That's incredibly powerful. Shifting our focus now, maybe closer to home for some listeners, North America. California has become almost synonymous with these apocalyptic wildfires. What's happening there, and how is it fundamentally connected to the broader climate picture?
Well, California's wildfires are no longer just, predictable seasonal events. They're escalating dramatically in intensity and scale. And this is directly due to climate-driven factors, higher temperatures and prolonged, more severe drought conditions. These factors transform vast areas of forest and chaparral into highly combustible tinderboxes, ready to ignite and spread with terrifying speed.
So it's drier and hotter, making fires bigger and faster.
Exactly. The 2020 fire season, for instance, scorched a record 4.3 million acres. It's hard to even picture that amount of land just leaving behind ash and devastation. And many will remember the devastating 2018 Camp Fire in the town of Paradise. It claimed 85 lives and razed 18,000 structures, essentially wiping the town off the map in hours.
I remember seeing those images. It was unbelievable.
Survivors describe fleeing through scenes like driving through hell. A really visceral experience of unimaginable loss. And extensive research now unequivocally links these megafires to the broader climate phenomenon. Droughts are lasting longer, making vegetation much drier. Temperatures are spiking to unprecedented levels, creating ideal conditions for these infernos. And what's more, these massive wildfires themselves release enormous amounts of carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere.
Another one of those feedback loops.
Yes, unfortunately, it further exacerbates the cycle of global warming. California's narrative really seems as a stark warning. No region, however developed or seemingly resilient, is beyond the reach of these profound impacts. It reveals vulnerabilities we perhaps didn't think we had.
And in South Asia, Bangladesh faces different yet equally dire challenges from climate change. What's the situation there? How are people coping?
Bangladesh is a very densely populated, low-lying delta nation, crisscrossed by this vast network of rivers flowing into the Bay of Bengal. It's confronting relentless and devastating flooding. You have rising sea levels coming in from the coast, combined with more powerful and frequent cyclone storms, both amplified by the changing climate. These factors consistently inundate its coastal regions, but also push further inland. Projections from major international bodies like the World Bank suggest that by 2050, as many as 17 million people in Bangladesh could become climate refugees.
17 million, displaced within their own country.
Displaced either within their own country, moving to already crowded cities, or potentially forced to seek refuge beyond its borders. I read an account from a farmer in Sapkira, a coastal district. He recounted losing his entire rice fields due to salinization saltwater intrusions.
That poisons the land.
Exactly. As he lamented, "My land is dead." His words just vividly highlighted the complete loss of livelihood, the loss of cultural connection to the land. This happens because rising sea levels push salt water further inland, contaminating fresh groundwater and agricultural fields, making them infertile. He was forced to relocate to the sprawling, overcrowded slums of Dhaka, the capital. And he represents one of millions potentially facing displacement. Just a couple of years ago, in 2020, floods submerged a third of the entire country, directly impacting over 7 million people. Widespread devastation. Bangladesh vividly underscores a disproportionate toll climate change exacts on the world's most vulnerable populations, those who contributed least to the problem, but suffer its most severe consequences.
It's a recurring theme, isn't it? Finally, let's look to the poles. The Arctic seems to be a crucial barometer for global warming. What's happening in that extremely cold region that impacts the rest of us, even those far from its icy reaches?
The Arctic region is indeed experiencing warming at an alarming rate, currently about 4 times faster than the global average.
4 times faster? Why so much faster?
It's largely due to feedback loops involving ice and snow. White ice reflects sunlight, but as it melts, it exposes darker ocean or land, which absorbs more heat, causing more melting the ice albedo feedback. This accelerated warming is particularly concerning. For indigenous communities like the Inuit in Nunavut, Canada, this rapid warming means thinner, less predictable sea ice. This fundamentally disrupts their traditional hunting practices and their entire way of life, which is dependent on stable ice conditions for centuries. As one hunter expressed with profound sadness, "The ice isn't safe anymore, we've lost friends." It speaks to the direct human cost, where traditional knowledge becomes tragically obsolete almost overnight.
A direct threat to life and culture.
Absolutely. And beyond the human impact, iconic species like polar bears face an acute extinction risk by the end of the century if current warming trends persist. Their habitats are literally melting away. But the crisis in the Arctic isn't isolated. Its melting ice contributes directly to global sea level rise, impacting coastal communities thousands of miles away. But here's where it gets even more complex and fascinating. The rapid Arctic warming can even alter global weather patterns far from the poles.
How does that work?
By disrupting the temperature difference between the Arctic and the mid-latitudes, it can affect the jet stream, those high-altitude winds that steer weather systems. A wavier, slower jet stream can lead to more persistent weather patterns, like prolonged heat waves or cold snaps, or heavier rainfall events in places far removed from the Arctic. It's a vivid demonstration of how interconnected our planetary systems truly are. What happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic.
What becomes profoundly clear from all these stories, Kiribati, California, Bangladesh, the Arctic, is that the burden of climate change isn't distributed evenly at all. This leads us straight to a crucial concept: climate justice. It's a term that really encapsulates the inherent unfairness of this global crisis.
That's a powerful observation, and you're absolutely right. Climate change is undeniably, fundamentally unfair. The nations and communities that bear the least responsibility for historical and ongoing greenhouse gas emissions are, quite frequently, the ones facing the most severe and immediate impacts. Think back to small island nations like Kiribati. They contribute negligible amounts of carbon dioxide to the global atmosphere, yet they are literally sinking under rising seas, caused by emissions primarily from elsewhere.
Right, while higher-income countries.
Exactly. Higher-income countries, which are responsible for about half of all historical emissions, often possess greater financial resources, better technology, more robust infrastructure to adapt to these changes or mitigate their effects, at least for now. This stark disparity, where those who did the least harm suffer the most, is what defines climate injustice. It's not just an environmental issue. It's a profound moral and ethical dilemma at the very heart of the crisis. It demands a global reckoning with historical responsibility and current capabilities.
And how does this disproportionate impact affect indigenous communities around the world? You mentioned the Inuit, but thinking more broadly, groups who often have these very unique, deeply spiritual and physical relationships with their land.
Indigenous peoples, like the Inuit or Amazonian tribes in South America, often have cultures and livelihoods that are deeply, inextricably intertwined with their local ecosystems, sometimes for millennia. These ecosystems are now being profoundly altered by a changing climate, disrupting generations of traditional knowledge, sustainable practices, and cultural identity built around that environment. In Brazil, for example, rampant deforestation, often driven by external economic pressures, directly threatens the ancestral lands of groups like the Yanomami people. Escalating fires and droughts disrupt their traditional farming practices and their access to vital resources like clean water and food sources from the forest. A Yanomami leader powerfully articulated this connection, simply stating, "Our forest is our life." It highlights their deep spiritual and physical connection, far beyond just resource extraction.
It's their pharmacy, their supermarket, their church, all in one.
A very good way to put it. And despite being the guardians of some of the most vital natural carbon sinks on the planet, these vast forests, these groups contribute minimally to global emissions, yet they suffer immensely from its consequences. Their struggle is a powerful, undeniable example of climate injustice playing out on the ground.
And what about the broader global south? How are these regions, often with fewer resources, less industrial history, coping with a crisis they largely didn't create? It feels like an immense unearned cost they're bearing.
It absolutely is an unearned cost. Regions like sub-Saharan Africa, for instance, are collectively responsible for less than 4% of cumulative global carbon dioxide emissions, a tiny fraction. Yet they are grappling with increasingly severe droughts, devastating floods, and widespread desertification that threatens agriculture and water security for millions. In Somalia, a profound drought just a couple of years ago displaced a staggering 1 million people internally and led to massive livestock losses, wiping out the livelihoods of countless pastoral families. As one farmer there poignantly expressed, "We didn't cause this, but we're suffering." This sentiment echoes across many vulnerable nations, revealing a deep sense of injustice and frustration.
Understandably so.
And this reality underscores a critical demand for climate justice. Wealthier nations, those historically responsible for the bulk of emissions, have a moral and historical obligation to provide substantial funding for adaptation measures, helping poorer countries build resilience to the changes already happening, and also to address loss and damage.
Loss and damage, that's a term we hear more often now. What does it mean exactly?
It refers to the unavoidable impacts of climate change that can no longer be adapted to. Think of submerged lands in Kiribati, or communities completely destroyed by a super typhoon, things you can't just adapt away from. The commitment to establish a loss and damage fund was finally formally acknowledged at a major international climate conference, COP27, in 2022. It was a significant, though long overdue, breakthrough for frontline nations. The challenge now, of course, lies in ensuring that these funds are substantial, accessible, and truly meet the needs of those most affected. It's still very much a work in progress.
Right. It's often the younger generations, isn't it, who will inherit this crisis most fully, who are most vocal and active in demanding change. What role are they playing? How are they making their voices heard on a global stage?
They're playing an absolutely pivotal role. Young people globally are rightfully demanding accountability and urgent action from current leaders, from institutions, from corporations. Figures like Greta Thunberg, whose Fridays for Future movement inspired millions of students worldwide to strike for climate action, have become global symbols. And others, like Vanessa Nakate from Uganda, powerfully advocate for African voices and perspectives to be centered in climate discussions, highlighting the justice dimension.
Making sure it's not just a Western narrative.
Exactly. Nakate, at a prominent global summit, bluntly asked world leaders, "Why should we pay for your pollution?" A question that cuts right to the heart of climate justice, challenging the moral responsibilities of the world's biggest emitters. And this youth activism isn't just talk, it's translating into real-world impact. We're seeing legal successes like a 2021 youth-led court case in Germany that successfully compelled the government to adopt stricter, more ambitious emissions targets. They are shaping the narrative, challenging the status quo, bringing moral clarity, and demanding a livable future with undeniable urgency. Their persistence is a really powerful force for change.
Okay, so beyond the profound human toll and the vital question of justice, climate change is also proving to be, well, an economic wrecking ball. The costs are truly staggering, touching everything from damaged infrastructure to disrupted supply chains, even impacting global financial markets. What does this look like in real terms?
The sheer financial outlay just from extreme weather events is immense, and it's growing rapidly year on year. Between 2010 and 2020 alone, such events cost the global economy an estimated $1.5 trillion.
$1.5 trillion, just in a decade.
Yeah, and that's likely an underestimate. To put individual events into perspective, Hurricane Ida in 2021 caused an estimated $75 billion in damages in the United States alone, hitting multiple states. And the devastating floods in Pakistan in 2022, which submerged a third of the country, as we mentioned, carried a price tag estimated at $30 billion by institutions like the World Bank. Rebuilding after these events places an enormous strain on national budgets, particularly for less affluent nations. They can ill afford such setbacks and are often pushed further into debt, creating this vicious cycle of vulnerability and dependence.
And how does this impact something as fundamental as food, something that affects everyone, everywhere, from the farmer to the consumer on the street?
The combined effects of escalating heat waves becoming more frequent and intense, and erratic rainfall patterns, so droughts followed by intense downpours, are profoundly threatening global crop yields.
Making farming much harder, much less predictable.
Exactly. In India, for example, intense heat waves back in 2022 slashed wheat yields by 15% in some key agricultural regions. That's a huge hit to a staple crop for a massive population. Projections from leading scientific bodies suggest that globally, overall crop yields could plummet by 10–25% by 2050 if current warming trends continue unchecked. This, in turn, inevitably drives up food prices, which disproportionately affects low-income households who spend a larger percentage of their income on food. And as we've witnessed historically in some regions, sharp rises in food prices can even spark social unrest and instability. We saw that with the bread riots in Sudan a few years back, partly linked to climate-related agricultural stress.
So food security is directly linked to climate stability.
Absolutely. It's a fundamental connection.
What about the broader financial world? Insurance companies, big capital markets. Are they truly feeling the heat from climate change? Or is it still a somewhat distant, abstract concern for them, something for the ESG reports?
No, they are definitely feeling the heat. And it's becoming far less abstract very quickly. Insurers are really at the front line of assessing physical risk, and they are facing rapidly escalating claims from climate-related disasters. In 2022, global insured losses from natural disasters reached an astounding $120 billion.
Wow, insured losses. So the total economic losses were even higher.
Much higher, yes. The increasing frequency and intensity of events mean that some areas, like parts of Florida, which are exceptionally prone to hurricanes, or certain coastal areas in other countries, are becoming prohibitively expensive, or in some cases even impossible, to insure against storm damage or flooding. This leaves homeowners and businesses incredibly vulnerable, often unable to rebuild or recover financially from future events. It creates uninsurable zones. And broader financial markets are also feeling the tremors. Climate-related risks, both the physical risks like storms and the transition risks associated with shifting away from fossil fuels, were attributed to a $500 billion drop in global GDP in 2020 alone, according to one study. It's a clear signal that investors, credit rating agencies, central banks are recognizing that climate change isn't just an environmental issue. It's a profound systemic risk to the global economy that can impact balance sheets, investment decisions, and long-term stability.
Okay, so there are significant costs. It sounds like a lot of, frankly, dire economic news, but is it all loss? Or are there genuine, tangible opportunities emerging from this immense challenge? Where does the hope for economic growth and innovation truly lie in all of this?
This is where the story shifts, and it shifts dramatically towards immense potential and what many see as a new economic frontier. The transition to a green economy, encompassing everything from renewable energy generation like solar and wind, to electric vehicles, energy efficiency solutions, sustainable agriculture, and advanced carbon capture technologies, is poised to be a massive job creator and a powerful driver of innovation.
So not just mitigating damage, but actually building something new.
Exactly. Projections indicate it could generate something like 24 million net new jobs globally by 2030 across various sectors: manufacturing, installation, maintenance, research and development. It requires new skills, creates new career paths, and you can see the investor confidence already. The incredible valuation of companies like Tesla, which hit a $1 trillion market cap back in 2021, clearly illustrates strong investor belief in clean technology and the burgeoning green sector. This isn't just a niche market anymore. It's becoming a fundamental reorientation of global industry and finance. So a swift and decisive transition is key, not only to minimizing the truly staggering economic costs of inaction, but also to maximizing the substantial economic gains, the new wealth creation, and the innovation that this new sustainable paradigm offers. It's a profound opportunity for innovation, enhanced economic resilience, particularly by reducing reliance on volatile global fossil fuel markets and long-term sustainable prosperity.
So the economic pivot is evident, the potential is there. Now let's talk about the practical tools at our disposal. Technology is often presented as a potential game changer in the climate fight. What are the most promising innovations that are either available now or rapidly developing on the horizon?
Renewable energy is undoubtedly at the forefront, and its progress over the last decade or two has been nothing short of revolutionary, really. Solar and wind power have seen incredible advancements in efficiency, meaning they generate more power from the same resource and, crucially, dramatic cost reductions. They are now cheaper than new fossil fuel generation in many, if not most, regions globally.
Cheaper than coal or gas? That's a huge shift.
It's a massive tipping point. As of 2021, renewables supplied about 29% of global electricity. That was a significant jump from just 19% a decade prior, showing the pace of change. Countries like Denmark demonstrate what's possible. They now derive over 50% of their electricity from wind alone, showing how a modern, industrialized economy can integrate high levels of variable renewables. And crucially, advancements in battery technology, lithium-ion batteries becoming cheaper and better, plus new chemistries emerging are making energy storage more reliable and affordable. This is key to paving the way for consistent 247 clean energy grids that aren't completely reliant on the sun shining or the wind blowing at any given moment. It addresses that intermittency challenge.
Right. Storage is the key enabler for renewables. What about capturing emissions directly, either from big industrial sources or even straight out of the air? Is that feasible, or is it still largely theoretical and super expensive?
Yes. Carbon capture technologies are definitely part of the conversation. There are basically two main types. Carbon capture and storage, or CCS, is designed to trap carbon dioxide emissions directly from large industrial sources. Think power plants, cement factories, steel mills before they enter the atmosphere. The captured euro is then typically transported and stored underground. The other type, direct air capture, or DAE, is arguably more challenging. It aims to extract euro directly from the ambient air where it's much more diffuse.
Pulling it right out of the atmosphere we breathe.
Exactly. There are operational examples, like a plant in Iceland run by a company called Climeworks. It utilizes DAC technology to capture about 4,000 tons of euro annually directly from the air. They then mineralize it, essentially turning it into rock for permanent underground storage. Now, while scaling these technologies could certainly play a role in reducing emissions, especially for those heavy industries that are really hard to decarbonize otherwise.
Like cement and steel you mentioned.
Right. But a major challenge remains: reducing the current high costs to make them more widely deployable and economically viable on a truly global scale. It's a promising area, it offers a critical tool in the toolbox, but it's definitely not a silver bullet. And most experts agree it's certainly not an excuse to delay the immediate, deep emissions reductions we need from other sources.
Okay, makes sense. And agriculture, which we mentioned earlier as a significant emitter, how is technology helping to make farming more sustainable and less impactful on the climate? This seems critical given rising global food demands.
Technology is truly transforming agriculture, moving it towards more sustainable practices. Precision farming, for instance, is a great example. It leverages tools like GPS, sensors, drones, and sometimes AI to optimize the precise use of water, seeds, and fertilizers. So farmers apply exactly what's needed, only where it's needed, and only when it's needed. This substantially cuts down on waste, reduces emissions from excess fertilizer use and runoff into waterways, and conserves precious resources like water.
Smarter farming, basically.
Exactly. Smarter, more efficient. In Kenya, for example, there's a tech firm called Apollo Agriculture, helping smallholder farmers adapt to increasingly erratic rainfall patterns. They provide climate-smart advice, access to better inputs, all delivered via mobile tech. And it's leading to reported yield boosts of around 20%, even in challenging drought conditions. Furthermore, looking ahead, innovative solutions like lab-grown meat or cultivated meat hold the potential to dramatically reduce methane emissions from livestock because they bypass the need for traditional animal farming altogether.
Growing meat without the cow.
Essentially, yes, growing it from animal cells in a controlled environment. Some nations, like Singapore and more recently the US, have already approved its sale, signaling a potential paradigm shift in food production that could have enormous climate benefits down the line, though it's still early days for large-scale production.
Fascinating. Are there any more radical or maybe experimental technologies being considered to tackle climate change? Perhaps things that sound a bit like science fiction or maybe even raise some ethical questions?
Indeed, there are some riskier ideas, often grouped under the umbrella term geoengineering, that are part of the broader scientific and policy discussion, though usually discussed with considerable caution and ethical debate. One main category involves solar geoengineering, sometimes called solar radiation management. The basic idea is to reflect a small fraction of sunlight away from Earth to deliberately cool the planet.
How would you even do that?
Well, one proposed method involves introducing reflective aerosols, tiny particles into the stratosphere, the upper atmosphere, to mimic the temporary cooling effect we see after large volcanic eruptions. Early modeling research, like a study from Harvard a few years back, suggests this could potentially offset a significant amount of warming, maybe even have it under certain scenarios. However, and this is a huge however, these approaches carry substantial risks and unknowns.
Like what kind of risks?
Potential unforeseen side effects on weather patterns, like altering vital monsoon rainfall that billions rely on for agriculture. It could create winners and losers regionally, potentially leading to geopolitical tensions. There's also the profound ethical dilemma. Who gets to decide if such planetary-scale technologies are deployed? What are the governance mechanisms? And there's the moral hazard concern, the worry that even researching these might reduce the incentive to do the hard work of cutting emissions, which everyone agrees is the fundamental solution.
Right, it could be seen as a dangerous distraction.
Exactly. So it's broadly viewed by the scientific community as a potential last resort, maybe something to consider only in dire emergency circumstances, if at all. It's certainly not seen as a primary solution or a substitute for fundamentally decarbonizing our economies. The absolute priority remains cutting emissions at the source.
It's vital to remember, as we've touched on, that while climate change is this undeniable global crisis, its manifestations are deeply regional. It affects different places in distinct ways. No one truly escapes its influence, but the nature of that influence varies widely, creating unique challenges and also unique adaptations.
That's a crucial point. Let's take Africa, for example. The Sahel region, that band of semi-arid land just south of the Sahara Desert, is grappling with severe desertification. This is starkly highlighted by the alarming fact that Lake Chad, once a vast freshwater lake supporting millions, has shrunk by a staggering 90% since the 1950s. It's deprived millions of water and livelihoods across multiple countries.
90%. That's almost gone.
Almost gone. And this shrinking of vital water bodies exacerbates food insecurity and can even fuel regional conflicts over scarce resources. Despite these daunting challenges, though, there are inspiring efforts towards resilience. Ethiopia, for example, undertook that ambitious tree planting campaign back in 2019, planting reportedly 350 million trees in a single day. a huge mobilization showcasing collective action and commitment to nature-based solutions. However, the financial reality is stark. Significant funding gaps persist. Africa requires an estimated $50 billion annually for effective climate adaptation, a sum that is currently largely unmet by international climate finance pledges.
A huge shortfall. What about Asia? With its massive populations, sprawling megacities, crucial agricultural lands, it presents another complex and urgent picture of climate vulnerability, right?
Absolutely. Asia's sprawling megacities, often located in coastal areas or river deltas, are particularly vulnerable to flooding. Jakarta, the capital of Indonesia, is a prime example. It's facing such severe land-sinking subsidence due to excessive groundwater extraction, combined with rising sea levels, that the government is actively relocating its capital functions to a new, purpose-built city on another island.
Moving the entire capital, that's drastic.
It's a monumental undertaking that underscores the severity of the threat. Elsewhere, in India, intensifying monsoons vital for agriculture, but becoming more erratic and powerful, displaced 14 million people in a single year recently due to flooding. Yet, alongside these immense challenges, you see innovative local adaptations emerging, like the development of floating farms in flood-prone areas of Bangladesh, allowing people to grow food even when the land is inundated. It offers valuable lessons in living with a changing climate and demonstrates human ingenuity in the face of adversity.
Fascinating resilience. What about Europe? How is it experiencing and responding to these changes? Given its relatively developed infrastructure and often progressive environmental policies, is it less impacted?
Definitely not immune. Europe experienced devastating consequences from climate change just in the summer of 2022, with an extreme heat wave that tragically claimed the lives of an estimated 60,000 people across the continent, according to subsequent analysis.
60,000?
Yeah.
From heat?
Yes. Excess mortality attributed to the extreme heat. It was a stark reminder that even well-resourced regions are highly vulnerable to extreme weather events. In response, the European Union has adopted ambitious policies, like its flagship Green Deal. It aims for a 55% reduction in emissions by 2030 compared to 1990 levels, and is committing over $1 trillion in investment towards green technologies and sustainable development. Individual nations are also leading. Germany, for instance, is a leader in solar power. On sunny days, solar sometimes provides over 50% of the country's entire electricity demand, demonstrating the potential of renewable energy even in temperate climates and showing how political will can drive rapid energy transitions.
And finally, the Americas. North and South America seem to face a blend of challenges, from natural disasters to crucial policy shifts and ongoing battles over vital ecosystems like the Amazon.
That's right. The United States continues to face those escalating threats from more powerful hurricanes hitting its coasts and devastating wildfires, particularly in the western states, as we discussed earlier. The costs are mounting year after year. In South America, deforestation remains a critical issue, especially in the Amazon basin. That vast rainforest released, on balance, about 1.5 billion tons of co-euro in 2021 alone, largely due to burning and land clearing. It's dangerously close to, or perhaps already past, a tipping point where it shifts from being a carbon sink to a source.
A worrying trend for such a vital ecosystem.
Hugely worrying. However, there are glimmers of hope. A recent shift in political leadership in Brazil has led to a noticeable slowdown in Amazon deforestation rates over the past year or so. It really demonstrates the profound impact that political will and concerted government action, like enforcing existing environmental laws, can have on environmental outcomes and, by extension, global climate efforts. It shows that policy and leadership really do matter.
Okay, it's clear that technology and policy are crucial, vital tools in this fight. But what about nature itself? You mentioned tree planting in Ethiopia, mangroves. Can Earth's own systems actively help us in this fight, or are they just passive victims bearing the brunt?
Oh, absolutely, not just victims. Nature offers incredibly powerful, often surprisingly low cost, and high-impact solutions for both absorbing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and building resilience against the climate impacts we're already facing. These are generally known as nature-based solutions. They leverage healthy, functioning ecosystems to provide benefits for both people and the planet. They show that nature isn't just a passive recipient of harm, but can be an active, intelligent ally in our efforts if we protect and restore it.
So, working with nature, not just trying to engineer our way out.
Exactly. Let's consider some key approaches. Reforestation and afforestation, planting trees where they were before, where they haven't been recently, is a remarkably effective strategy for drawing carbon out of the atmosphere as those trees grow. China's Great Green Wall project, although complex and debated in some aspects, has involved planting an estimated 100 billion trees since the late 1970s, making significant strides in combating desertification in some areas and absorbing vast amounts of furos.
And mangroves. You mentioned them earlier. What's special about them?
Mangrove forests, those unique coastal ecosystems found in tropical and subtropical regions, are incredibly valuable. They're like superheroes of the coast. In places like Vietnam, mangrove restoration projects have not only demonstrably reduced coastal erosion, acting as natural barriers protecting communities from storm surges, but they've also significantly enhanced carbon sequestration. Mangroves are exceptionally good at pulling QROs from the atmosphere and storing it very efficiently in their complex root systems in the waterlogged soil below ground, often at rates far greater per hectare than terrestrial forests.
Wow, so protection and carbon storage.
Double benefit, yes. And then there's regenerative farming, which focuses on improving soil health through practices like cover cropping, no-till farming, and integrating livestock differently. Healthy soil can store significantly more carbon. In Australia, for example, initiatives around carbon farming aim to boost the ability of agricultural soil to sequester carbon, while simultaneously reducing farm emissions, creating healthier, more resilient land and contributing to climate mitigation. And beyond these specific projects, there's a broader, overarching goal outlined in key international agreements, like the UN Convention on Biological Diversity. That goal is to protect 30% of the planet's land and oceans by 2030, the 30 by 30 target.
30% by 2030?
Yes. Achieving this ambitious target could potentially have extinction risks for species, but also dramatically enhance Earth's natural capacity to store carbon in forests, wetlands, oceans, and soils. Protecting biodiversity and fighting climate change are fundamentally linked. Healthy ecosystems are our crucial long-term allies.
So we have the robust science, the stark impacts driving urgency, the ingenious technology, and nature itself as an ally. But ultimately, who steers the ship? It often comes down to governments and global policy. What role do they play, and how effective have they been so far in translating ambition into tangible results?
Governments and international agreements are indeed absolutely central to shaping our collective response. Individual actions are important, corporate actions are important, but government policy sets the rules of the game. The Paris Agreement, signed back in 2015, was a landmark achievement. It established that crucial global goal to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius and pursue efforts to limit it to 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial levels. It recognized that every fraction of a degree matters in averting the most catastrophic outcomes. Getting nearly 200 countries to agree on that was remarkable, considering the diverse interests involved.
A framework for action, then. Have we seen successes based on that framework?
There have been notable successes in terms of ambition, yes. The European Union and Japan, for example, have legally committed to achieving net zero emissions by 2050. China, the world's largest emitter currently, aims for carbon neutrality before 2060. These are significant pledges from major economies, signaling a global shift in direction and influencing investment patterns. However, and it's a big however, substantial gaps persist between those long-term ambitions and current actions. Global emissions, after a brief dip during the pandemic, actually rose again by about 1.1% in 2022. And concerningly, global coal use hit a record high that same year.
A record high for coal, despite all the pledges.
Yes. It demonstrates that despite the promises, the world is still heavily reliant on fossil fuels, and the energy transition isn't happening fast enough everywhere. It indicates that while commitments are being made on paper, the pace of actual emissions reduction needs to accelerate dramatically, urgently, to meet those agreed-upon Paris targets and avoid the most dangerous climate scenarios. There's a clear, worrying disconnect between ambition and implementation right now.
And what about the financial support for nations most impacted, particularly those in the global south who, as we keep highlighting, are suffering disproportionately while having contributed the least? Is money flowing where it's most needed?
That's another critical aspect of global action and climate justice. Climate finance. Wealthier, developed nations pledged back in 2009 to provide $100 billion annually by 2020 to less developed nations. This money was intended for both mitigation, helping them develop cleanly, and adaptation, helping them cope with the impacts they're already facing.
And did they meet that $100 billion goal?
Unfortunately, no. The commitment has not yet been fully met consistently. The latest verified figures showed around $83 billion was delivered in 2020. While the amount is increasing, the target has been missed. This persistent gap highlights a significant trust deficit between the global north and south. Promises made haven't been fully kept, which makes cooperation on other issues harder. However, as we mentioned, a significant breakthrough at COP27 in Egypt in 2022 was the agreement to establish that dedicated loss and damage fund. This fund is specifically intended to compensate vulnerable nations for those unavoidable climate impacts, the damages that go beyond what adaptation measures can reasonably address.
So separate from adaptation funding.
Yes, conceptually separate, though the lines can blur. It was a hard-won political victory for frontline nations who had been demanding it for decades. Although the crucial details of how it will be funded, who contributes, who receives funds, and how it operates are still being hammered out in ongoing negotiations, its establishment represents a crucial, albeit light, step towards climate justice and acknowledging historical responsibility for the impacts being felt now.
With all this talk of global policy, trillion-dollar investments, massive technological shifts, it might feel easy for listeners to think that individual actions are insignificant, like a mere drop in a very large, very turbulent ocean. But here's where it gets, I think, truly empowering. You are not powerless. What can listeners actually do in their daily life to make a genuine, impactful difference?
That's such an important question, and it's a very common feeling, that sense of being overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the problem. It's easy to feel like your choices don't matter. But while systemic change driven by governments and corporations is absolutely vital, we can't solve this without it. Individual actions, when multiplied across millions, even billions of people, create a substantial collective impact. Every choice does matter, and taken together, they form a powerful cultural and market signal that drives broader shifts in demand, encourages business innovation, and ultimately puts pressure on policymakers. So here are some concrete steps anyone can consider.
Okay, let's break it down. Let's start with how we move around. Transportation is a big one for many people's personal carbon footprint, right?
It often is, yes. So think consciously about your transportation choices. Can you opt for biking or walking for shorter trips? Can you use public transit more often? Is carpooling an option? Reducing reliance on single-occupancy vehicles, especially those powered by fossil fuels, makes a measurable difference in local air quality as well as carbon emissions. And air travel is particularly impactful. If you travel frequently by air, consider flying less if possible, or combining trips. Flights contribute about 2% of global CO2 emissions currently, but those emissions happen high in the atmosphere where their warming effect can be amplified. Even small adjustments to your daily commute or leisure travel habits can really add up over time and contribute to lowering your overall carbon footprint.
Right. Small changes, multiplied, make a difference. What about our dietary choices? That seems like a very personal area, but does what we eat truly have a climate impact? How significant is it?
Your diet can have a surprisingly significant climate impact, often more than people realize, as we touched on with agriculture's emissions. Choosing to eat less meat, particularly red meat like beef and lamb, can make a meaningful difference. The production of just 1 kilogram of beef generates around 60 kilograms of CO2-equivalent greenhouse gases. That includes methane from the animals, nitrous oxide from fertilizers for feed, and land use change.
60 kilograms, compared to what for vegetables?
Compared to maybe half a kilogram of CO2 equivalent for a kilogram of vegetables or legumes. The difference is huge. So incorporating more plant-based meals into your diet, maybe starting with meatless Mondays or just reducing portion sizes of meat, is a powerful step that directly reduces demand driving emissions from the agricultural sector. It's a direct way to vote with your fork, influencing what farmers produce and what supermarkets stock.
Okay, transport, diet.
Right.
What about beyond personal consumption? How can someone engage at a broader level to amplify their individual efforts and really push for that systemic change we need?
Become an advocate for change. Use your voice. This can mean different things for different people. Crucially, in democratic societies, use your vote. Support climate-friendly policies and representatives who demonstrate they understand the urgency of the crisis and have credible plans. Ask candidates about their climate stance. You can also join local environmental groups or community initiatives. Collective action often creates the strongest ripple effect, providing support and amplifying messages. Engaging in the democratic process, contacting your elected officials, participating in local activism, it all sends a powerful message that you prioritize climate action and want to see systemic change happen faster. Your participation encourages others and pressures decision makers to be bolder.
Makes sense. And what about right in our own homes? Most of us live in a house or an apartment. Are there simple, actionable changes we can make there to reduce our environmental footprint, maybe even save some money in the process?
Absolutely. Simple changes around the house can significantly reduce your energy consumption and, by extension, your carbon footprint, often with cost savings too. Switching to energy-efficient LED light bulbs is an easy win. They use up to 80% less electricity and last much, much longer than old incandescent bulbs. Improving your home's insulation in the attic, walls, around windows and doors prevents heat loss in winter and stops heat getting in during summer. This significantly reduces the energy needed for heating and air conditioning, which are often major energy users. And remember to unplug electronic devices when they're not in use, or use power strips you can switch off. Many devices draw small amounts of phantom power even when turned off.
That vampire power drain.
Exactly. These small adjustments might seem minor individually, but cumulatively they reduce demand on energy grids, which are still often heavily reliant on fossil fuels. Less demand means fewer emissions and often lower utility bills for you. And remember, the power of all these actions, transport, diet, advocacy, home efficiency, truly scales up when millions upon millions of individuals make these conscious choices. It creates a powerful ripple effect across society. It shifts cultural norms, drives demand for sustainable products and services, encourages businesses to innovate and offer greener options, and ultimately provides the social license and political pressure for governments to adopt more ambitious climate policies. Your choices really do matter in that bigger picture.
Well, this deep dive into the reality of climate change, it can feel quite daunting, can't it? We've explored sinking nations, raging wildfires, immense economic costs, the challenging realities faced by vulnerable communities around the world. But we've also seen, I think, the extraordinary grit of humanity, the incredible ingenuity of science, and the undeniable power of collective action when people come together.
Absolutely. From Kiribatis's determined fight for survival and cultural preservation, to California's communities rebuilding after devastation, Bangladesh's innovative adaptations to living with floods, and the Arctic community's resilience in the face of bewilderingly rapid change, the human spirit perseveres and finds ways to adapt. And science offers us powerful tools. Transformative renewable energy getting cheaper by the day, promising carbon capture technologies for hard-to-abate sectors, and harnessing the intrinsic power of nature-based solutions that work with the Earth's own systems, not against them. And let's not forget the unstoppable force of youth activism. From global figures inspiring millions to countless local organizers making tangible change in their own communities, it's a testament that profound change isn't just possible. It feels imperative, maybe even inevitable, driven by that generation's demand for a future.
Leading scientific bodies like the IPCC are very clear. They urge us to have global emissions by 2030, that's less than a decade away now, to keep the most dangerous warming scenarios at bay, particularly that crucial 1.5 degrees C limit agreed in Paris. That's an incredibly ambitious goal, certainly. It requires unprecedented global cooperation and speed. But if history teaches us anything, it's our remarkable capacity as humans to pivot rapidly in the face of grand challenges. Think of wartime mobilizations that transformed entire economies almost overnight, or the successful international efforts driven by science and policy to repair the ozone layer in just a few decades. We can do big things when we decide to. This journey, this transition, it starts with all of us. Governments setting the direction, businesses innovating and investing, communities organizing and adapting, and you, the individual, making conscious choices and demanding action.
So the critical question that remains, perhaps, for you, the listener, to consider is this. What role will you play in shaping the next chapter of this unfolding story? How will you choose to engage with this defining challenge and opportunity of our time?
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We really hope this exploration has given you a clearer, perhaps more nuanced understanding of the immense challenges, but also the real opportunity that lie ahead. Until next time, keep digging deeper.